Oh, so guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to History's Ultimate Blunders by Monkey. Never seen this channel before, and this video has been all over my YouTube feed for the last, I guess, week now. It's been up for 9 days, but I've been seeing it every day. I'm logging into YouTube and I'm seeing what videos I should react to today. I've been seeing this video, and I didn't initially know if I was going to watch it or not because I just didn't know, and then I decided I'm going to now, which is why I'm now reacting to it pretty much. But yeah, if you know more about this channel, maybe you will enjoy this reaction, or you've already watched it. If you haven't already watched it, obviously you can go watch the video first, or you can just go and give them a like, subscribe if you enjoy the video after I react to it. Links will be in the description to the video in my channel description. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We're going to check this out. I don't know what sort of topics they're going to go into, so it'll be an interesting watch. And that's pretty much it. But yeah, if you want to see more of these reactions, let me know in the comments. And yeah, links are in the description to my Patreon if you want to see some more reactions of mine that I can't post to YouTube, whether it's films, series, music reactions, YouTube reactions mainly that I can't react to on YouTube because of whatever reason. It's too much, too graphic or whatever. YouTube are very strict with what you can react to these days. So yeah, links are in the description to that for those interested. Then yeah, let's just see this video and learn about all these blunders that are in this video.
The butterfly effect is a concept in chaos theory which asks the question, to what extent can a deadly torrential hurricane be caused by something as small as an insect flapping its wings several weeks earlier? How much of your life is determined by events so disconnected from you that you couldn't possibly trace back?
I always think about these things. I always think about, like, if I do a certain thing, does that lead to this happening? Does that lead to that happening? That's how my mind is. I don't know why. I feel like I live my life by the butterfly effect. Just thinking all these little things will cause something, you know?
There are many examples of famous mistakes throughout history. Russia selling Alaska to the United States. NASA losing $1 million satellite because some engineers used metric and some used imperial. Or Blockbuster turning down the offer to buy Netflix.
What?
These are fun.
Okay, so there's some wild ones already.
Dinner table facts that are well known to the public. But I'm more interested in the invisible walls that trap us, built by mistakes so small yet so monumental that most people have no idea that they're even in prison. The 5 blunders outlined in this video are so unbelievably minor that you'll find it hard to believe how much they've altered the world around us. But once you see them, you'll find them hard to ignore.
Okay. This is going to be a good video, man. A weatherman destroys a city. Okay. These topics are going to be crazy. What am I seeing right now?
It's a cold winter morning on the exposed south-facing gully of the highest mountain in Great Britain. Cambridge student Charles Thomas Rees Wilson is interning at the Ben Nevis Weather Observatory, a permanently staffed outpost providing cloud data in order to perfect the emerging field of weather prediction. It was here that clouds were first documented and described in a scientific way. Conditions in the small hut are perishing. Temperatures rarely went above freezing, and the structure was frequently snowed in. But sometimes there were periods of calmness, and on one frosty morning, when the winds and sleet and snow had died down, Wilson stepped out of the dainty shack and stood on the cliff edge. He could see his shadow cast down on the clouds below, and as the clouds parted more and the sun was fully revealed, he saw this.
Okay. He saw a rainbow.
An almost supernatural optical illusion called a glory. It was beautiful. Wilson was so mesmerized by the effect that he wanted to know exactly what caused it. He wanted to create a glory for himself. Soon after, he took off back to Cambridge, and by 1911 he had built a device that could create a cloud in a bottle. A cloud chamber.
Okay.
And the design was simple. So simple, in fact, that you can make one yourself. There's a tutorial on YouTube. Up here, you have a glass container.
That's kind of crazy how some things that were once upon a time, these crazy inventions, are now just able to be created by any random person. If I can create something, that's when you know it's easy to create. It's just crazy how those sort of things work. Like in 100 years' time, what are like some crazy inventions or creations that we've had in the past 5 years? I'm trying to think. I can't think. But then in 100 years' time, any person with just a few bits lying around, and if you get a few things from the shops, you'll be able to build what we find now impossible, or what we find now insanely hard, you know.
Filled with water or alcohol vapor. And the floor of that container is a piston connected to a valve leading to a vacuum chamber. When the valve is opened, air rushes in to fill the vacuum, pulling down the piston and expanding the glass container. The sudden drop in pressure up here creates tiny wisps of clouds. But why? The common belief at the time was that water moisture in the air condensed onto dust particles, creating clouds. But when Wilson cleaned all the dust from the device, the clouds were still showing up. He wasn't sure where else they could be coming from, so he asked his university colleague, Ernest Rutherford of the physics department, what might be going on. Rutherford suggested X-raying the machine in action to see if radiation had anything to do with it. Recently, it had been proven cosmic rays from outer space are constantly whizzing through the atmosphere, which could have something to do with the formulation of clouds. And when Wilson ran the tests again, the X-rays captured something quite remarkable. The inside of the machine was covered with invisible streaks, spirals and circles, and no two X-rays were the same. Wilson took the images back to Rutherford and asked him what they were. "My goodness," said Rutherford, "you're the first person to photograph particles." Background radiation was passing through the machine, ionizing the gas particles inside and giving them a positive charge. When the machine was activated, the drop in pressure attracted the vapor to condense onto these charged particles and produce the effect. So there is a link between radiation and clouds. Huh. And with that, Wilson stopped using the machine and went back to learning about the weather. But while Wilson was done with his machine, Rutherford was still curious. He showed the photographs to his colleagues. They realized that particle physics was now no longer theoretical. They could use a cloud chamber to actually see particles.
What?
They built their own and told all the other particle physicists. For the next 40 years, Wilson's cloud chamber was the scientific standard for viewing particles and radiation.
What the fuck? How has he created this absolute masterpiece on accident? There were so many creations though, like so many inventions at the time that were meant for something so different, and then it's just been useful for something like this. That just probably wasn't even in his mind at the time.
And the leaps and bounds that the study of physics made in that time was monumental.
Damn.
A breakthrough so important that Wilson was awarded the 1927 Nobel Prize in Physics for his contribution to radiation.
Einstein's there as well. God, when was Einstein around? I don't even know the history of Einstein. I always sort of picture him as a guy that was around sort of the same era as, I know he wasn't, but the same era as Shakespeare. That's how I sort of view them both. But Einstein was nowhere near that time. He was like, I guess, the 1927, and he looks, what, 60 years old at this time? So, yeah, a long time ago, but not as long as I initially used to think.
Studies, even though he was just interested in clouds. Within 2 years, the first model of the atom was drawn up. By 1927,
Wow.
the first theories of quantum mechanics were published. In 1932, the neutron was proven to exist. A year later, the electron microscope was invented. In 1939, uranium fission was discovered.
Was this all because of his creation that wasn't even meant for this?
In 1942, scientists in Chicago would make the world's first nuclear chain reactor. And in 1945, 34 years after building the cloud chamber, Wilson's discovery would create a cloud more devastating than he could possibly have imagined.
But this ain't his fault. You can't pin this on him. This title was a bit misleading, giving him the blame for this. Enola Gay. You all know what this was.
But this wasn't really a mistake. So he showed the photograph to the wrong person. A wrong path for humanity, maybe. And while the atomic bombings only killed 250,000 people, the opening of the atom has also generated forces that can be used for good, such as radiation therapy or nuclear energy. For that reason, I rank it at the bottom of my 5 big mistakes. It has, so far at least, been the least damaging blunder I will discuss in this video.
The least, I mean, yeah, because there's so many positives, but the fact that the least one, because it wasn't his fault, but it led to the Hiroshima bombs, and then I guess you could say Chernobyl and stuff like that. But this is ranked the lowest, the least destructive. I guess because the positives do outweigh the negatives, if you could say. I mean, I think that is definitely the case. So what's going to be after this? This is going to be a good reaction, man. I like this already. Like these mistakes leading to these inventions or whatever. These mistakes that lead to like these things happening. This is going to be a good video.
Let's hope it stays that way. However, our old pal the X-rays aren't completely innocent. Around the same time, they played their part in a much deadlier mistake.
The woman who knew too much. 1955.
Oxford, 1943. The government had a problem. Workers in munitions factories were getting sick at an alarming rate. On Mondays, they would come in healthy and fit, but on Fridays, they would be taking frequent breaks due to lethargy, vomiting, and nausea. The industry had a high turnover rate at a crucial time during the war, and nobody knew why. Was it because of the TNT, or was it because the workers were all people too weak to join the army and were thus more susceptible to disease? Hired to solve this problem was a team of statisticians led by Dr. Alice Stewart at the Oxford Institute of Social Medicine, a new field of study focusing on treating the conditions where disease arise, not just the disease itself. Nobody on the team knew anything about the chemical properties of TNT. They were all stats nerds after all, so they took a different approach of creating surveys for each factory worker to fill out. Everything from their diet, lifestyle, living conditions, what shifts they worked at the factory, and what work they actually did. They found that workers on the night shift who handled the chemical carbon tetrachloride were most likely to get sick, and if you're a chemist or a medical student, you might be able to guess why. Carbon tetrachloride is very similar to chloroform, the anesthetic.
Oh wow.
Added to the fact that the windows of the factory were boarded up during the night shift due to blackout restrictions, the vapours were getting trapped in the air and making the workers sick. And the team were able to discover this only through surveying the workers. No chemistry knowledge required. After the war, the institute fell on hard times. With no more government funding, they had to prove social medicine was a worthy field of study. Those days, the best way to gain notoriety and funding was to tackle one of the big issues of the day. Lung cancer, polio, smallpox. All of these were being worked on by other scientists and the field was overcrowded, so no luck there. But what about leukemia, cancer of the blood? For some reason, leukemia rates were skyrocketing among children, and there was talk of a leukemia epidemic.
Fuck, imagine that. An epidemic of like leukemia in a time for kids. That is brutal, you know.
In 1930, the rate of leukemia in newborn babies in the USA was 180 in 100,000.
What? Look at the rise.
By 1955, it had more than tripled. Despite this, the most the Institute could muster for a leukemia study was £1,000 from a private donor, a budget too small to possibly conduct any meaningful research with. Unless they used the same methods as the factory study. Armed with this tiny budget, Dr. Stewart set off across England, interviewing parents and comparing it with hospital records. for every child cancer death she studied, she would also study one non-cancer death to compare with. The £1,000 grant was spent on train fares and hotel accommodation, and by requesting existing hospital records, she had effectively loaded the cost of the study onto the taxpayer. Within a year, she had visited all 203 health departments in the country and interviewed thousands of mothers about a wide array of subjects. Did you own a dog? Do you eat fish regularly? What about tinned fruits? Does your husband use aerosols at work? Do you take the bus regularly? Nothing was turning up, except in one metric: X-rays. Children who had died of leukemia were 3 times as likely to have been X-rayed in the womb.
Oh, wow. Fuck me. Now, this is scary because I had an X-ray like a week ago. Bit over a week ago. And obviously, it's changed so much, but you just get that idea now. And just because they were getting X-rayed whilst in the womb, this gave them a higher chance. Madness.
X-raying pregnant women made the baby 900% more likely to develop leukemia. And in the days before ultrasound...
Oh, so that's why they now have to do the jelly thing. Wow, that's insane.
This was basically every child in the developed world. People began to take notice when she published her first set of results in 1956. She was given more funding, this time to check the medical records of Scotland and Wales too. Soon her team was able to trace 80% of all childhood cancer deaths in Britain back to being X-rayed in the womb.
Mad.
Her final report was published.
What the hell? The fact that she managed to just get it all down to that is insane.
In 1958, a child that was X-rayed was twice as likely to die of cancer in the next 10 years, up to 5 times as likely for certain groups. We need to stop X-raying babies immediately. This could have been Nobel Prize worthy. On a budget of £1,000, Alice Stewart and her team had proven something that could save millions of children. Nevertheless, there was opposition, in the form of Richard Doll of the Medical Research Council. The council had been called upon by Parliament to investigate the effect of atomic radiation on survivors of the Hiroshima bombing, specifically the frequency of leukemia and other cancers. If anyone knew anything about radiation and cancer, it was Dr. Doll, and he was pretty respected. While Stewart had been travelling up and down the country, he had proven that smoking and asbestos causes lung cancer, which was pretty big news in the 50s. Doll hit back with a study showing the opposite. Low doses of radiation were completely safe at any age. They compared the leukemia rates of children born in Hiroshima after the atomic bombings with the rates of X-rayed children in 8 English hospitals. And leukemia rates were no worse after X-rays than after the atomic bombings. "Oh right, guess she was wrong," said the doctors, and went back to using X-rays on children.
Oh man.
This study had flaws though. It only studied born children in 8 hospitals. Quite a small sample size compared to every medical authority in the country, and was only looking for leukemia, not all types of cancers. It only surveyed children up to 5 years old, whereas Alice & Co. studied children up to 10. There was no control group, it was only comparing Hiroshima victims to X-rayed children. By all means, it was an inferior study. So why did everybody believe the Doll study over the Stewart study? Because people didn't want to admit their doctors were wrong. People trust doctors. They're figures of authority. You put your health in their hands. Meanwhile, doctors don't want to admit they're hurting people. They become doctors to do the exact opposite. One letter from a radiobiologist in the newspaper opined, "Stewart used to do good work, but now she's gone senile. She doesn't know what she's doing. We're saving lives with X-rays."
Oh man.
Plus, X-rays are cool. Since their invention in the 1890s, everyone was using X-rays for all sorts of novelty factors.
Step right up to X-Ray World, the greatest theme park this side of the Massatucky River. Get your bones X-rayed for cheap. No undressing required. You there, sir. Need a new heel for your shoe? Try on special X-ray photoscope, see? They don't have that in Shelbyville. Got an injury? We'll X-ray you for free and see if it helps. It probably won't, but there are no side effects. Got back pain?
Oh,
Try the
God.
latest cure from the Netherlands. Blasting your spine with radiation. Only 20% of our patients die of cancer. Guaranteed.
Society was truly addicted to getting their bones scanned. And here
Miscorrect posture 1956. Do you know how sick humans have to be to do stuff like this? What is wrong with what is just wrong with humans in general? Like, what the
hearing
fuck?
that they could be bad for you must have felt like learning roller coasters give you polio. But year after year, more and more studies, better studies with more funding, were published that confirmed what Dr. Stewart and her team knew all along. X-raying babies causes cancer. It wasn't until 30 years later, in 1980, when American medical groups recommended that doctors avoid X-raying
They waited that long to then finally change it. What the
pregnant
hell?
women unless absolutely necessary. Before then, 266,000 pregnant women were X-rayed every year, increasing their child's risk of cancer by up to 5 times. In 1997, Richard Doll finally retracted his response paper and admitted that Stewart had been right all along. But by then, it was too late. His legacy as the doctor who linked lung cancer to cigarettes was already cemented, and his reputation could not be ruined. And millions of unborn children across the world had been given an unsafe dose of radiation. But this story is not even close to the worst blunder on this list.
This is such a insanely well put together video.
In fact, it wasn't even the biggest medical blunder of 1956.
The deadliest game of golf? Like, what?
The year was 1955. All was well in America. The economy was up, the horrors of World War II were long behind, and people still had the decency to say hello on the street. But all was not well in the Cherry Hills Golf Club in Denver, Colorado. President Dwight Eisenhower was enjoying a nice game of golf one afternoon when he suddenly complained of indigestion. He was determined to continue his day as usual, but throughout the afternoon his pain only worsened, and Eisenhower was soon hospitalized in the late evening. The diagnosis? A massive heart attack. Luckily, he survived, but was bedridden for several weeks. The public were worried. The stock market tanked and had its worst day since the start of World War II. Congress questioned if he was still fit to serve. The President of the United States suddenly dying during the Cold War was a potential weakness that could be exploited by the enemy. Eisenhower's doctors scrambled to examine everything about the president's lifestyle to try and determine the cause. And he wasn't alone. Heart attacks were the biggest killer of men in America at the time, at a rate many times higher than in the 1920s. What was going on? One man said he had the answer. Dr. Ansel Keys of the University of Minnesota. Keys looked at the average American diet and concluded it was fat. Half of the president's diet was meat and dairy. High-fat foods, which, according to the food pyramids that adorn the walls of every biology classroom in the world, is bad for you. His proof? A study of 5,000 people living in Italy, Greece, Yugoslavia, Finland, the Netherlands, Japan, and the United States. And look, the more fat they ate, the more unhealthy they were. Undeniable proof. Keys recommended that we cut this fat from 50% of our diet to 10% and replace the gap with carbohydrates and sugar. Some
What?
scientists, such as John Yudkin, weren't convinced. They said that
Wait, to have 50% carbohydrates? That sounds a bit nuts. You're gonna get fat from
too
that.
much sugar could be deadly. arguing that if any
yeah,
other
sugar.
ingredient was found to be half as deadly as sugar, it would promptly be banned as a health hazard. The Lancet, a prominent medical journal, sounded the alarm too. Although fat is bad in high quantities, the cure should not be worse than the disease. 1 meat plus 2 vegetables had been the standard meal for decades in the West. Diet-wise, the 1950s were the healthiest Europeans and Americans had been before or since. Sugar had only recently arrived in large quantities in our diet 300 years ago. But we've been eating fat since humans first roamed the earth. Now things were changing. Diets switched from this to this. Sugary, carby treats stocked the shelves of grocery stores. Also, why did you exclude France and Germany from your study? These countries eat a lot of fat and no sugar, and they don't have high heart attack rates. Your study doesn't account for lifestyle differences, and wait, did you forget to test the low-fat diet on a single woman? But Keyes was extremely argumentative. He would debate anyone about anything, anytime, anywhere. When criticised at all, he would always respond, "I studied 5,000 people. How many people did you study?" Meanwhile, Yudkin was a mild-mannered Englishman who wasn't all that good at sticking up for himself. He was accused of being a shill for the meat and dairy industry. His work was derided as science fiction by the World Sugar Research Organization. Keyes' larger-than-life personality, plus a few bribes from the sugar industry, won the scientific world over to his theory of fat being bad, sugar and carbs being good. The first US dietary advice was published in 1980, with many countries copying this advice and giving it to their own population. For the first time in nutrition history, it was recommended to eat less of something rather.
So where is fruit here? Does fruit come under vegetables, I guess? Because there's fruits here. Or under sugar, because there's a lot of sugar in fruits. Like, where does the fruit come under here? I guess it's under the vegetables, right?
Than an equal amount of everything. And the effects have been disastrous. Before the dietary advice was published, 15% of Americans and 10% of Europeans were classed as obese. Those figures are now over 35 and 25% respectively. By 2030, it's estimated half of Americans will be considered obese. The epidemic of obesity costs the world $1.2 trillion annually. Hundreds of thousands of people in America alone die of obesity-related causes every year, and heart disease is the biggest killer. In 2008, an Oxford University study finally proved that there was no link between saturated fat and heart disease. France, the country with the highest intake of saturated fat in Europe, had the lowest rate of heart disease. Ukraine, the country with the lowest intake of saturated fat, had the highest. Other organisations such as the United Nations and the University of California have corroborated this. But even though Dr. Keyes' fat theory has been disproven, it's going to be really difficult to undo the damage he did to public education around food. Our dietary preferences have already changed. Supermarkets have already altered their recipes to conform to the false dietary advice.
And there's no going back now. I mean, we're in this situation now. We're addicted to these foods. There's no way that it's going to change again. It's individual people that will be able to change, but the overall thing won't change.
Cultural perceptions around the word fat have associated it with getting fat, while carbs are seen as a source of energy that keeps us going. Low fat is touted as a selling point on various food items.
That's very true, and for me, that's definitely a thing that I do as well. Not all the time, but the fat that they don't have, it's obviously they use a chemical or whatever to get rid of the fat or something. So there's probably there's got to be some negatives to foods as well that have 0% fats, because you do need fats. I just sort of see it as like a thing. Like I'll get my fats from a lot of foods. I'm not like the cleanest eater all the time, so I'll have foods with fats and stuff, or a lot of I eat mince a lot, I eat chicken a lot when there's fat, obviously, and those are slight amounts anyway. But even with beef, minced beef, I'll get the lowest fat possible, which is usually 5%. So there's a good point, to be fair. All foods are directed to have when you see it has the less fat it has, the better for you, which is how a lot of people view it. Like, I think 99% of people view it like that, to be honest.
But most importantly, government diet advice, which every department from schools to hospitals to agriculture relies on, is slow to update. When Yudkin testified before the Senate Committee on Healthy Living, Senator George McGovern asked him if he really believed that sugar was bad and fat was okay. "I believe that, yes," replied Yudkin. "That is exactly the opposite of what my doctor told me," said McGovern. So what should we be eating? The Harvard School of Public Health has proposed an alternative to the now outdated food pyramid. It's the healthy eating plate. It's more or less a return to the old dietary advice of eating an equal amount of everything and keeping sugar to a minimum. These days, the media likes to blame advertising, television, lack of self-control, or fast food companies as a reason why everyone is so unhealthy these days. But the real answer is because of one heart attack and one opportunistic doctor 70 years ago.
Mad.
So what did cause Eisenhower to have that heart attack? It was smoking. Eisenhower smoked 3 packs of cigarettes per day.
God damn it. Yeah, he doesn't even look unhealthy there. What's the point? He doesn't even look fat or anything. So what was the... Like, come on, man.
It was in the midst of the Napoleonic
Burning
Wars when French inventor Philippe de Girard developed a new way of storing food for long periods of time. He sealed the uncooked meal into a metal container and then heated the container over a fire for 6 hours. This prevented the food inside from spoiling for months or even years. He had invented tinned food. As we all know, tinned food has revolutionized the way we consume our meals. Philippe certainly deserved the riches and fame that would have stemmed from his groundbreaking achievement. But it was not to be. During that time, the patent system in France was nationalized. If you had a cool idea, you sent it to the French Academy. They would forcibly take your invention and would only compensate you if they thought the idea was any good.
Wow.
In this case, they didn't like it that much, and Philippe received nothing. And this
That is a joke.
was the mistake that set off the chain reaction. Annoyed that he had been passed over, he travelled to England in the hope of getting a higher price for his invention. Britain had a more modern patent system. Whoever filed the patent was allowed to make as much money as they wanted from it. There was a more entrepreneurial spirit. Philippe sold his tinned food patent for £1,000 to manufacturers Donkin and Hall, who then started mass-producing canned meals for the Royal Navy and other shipping companies. For 300 years, the diet of sailors had been salted meat and biscuits, and malnutrition was the biggest cause of death in the industry. Now, a variety of food could be kept in the hold for much longer. Sailors' health improved, and it helped cement the Royal Navy's role in making Britain the global super...
That's crazy how it linked to that. How his invention that was rejected initially by France or whatever, then ended up leading to, I guess, the British army at that time being the strongest in the world.
Of the 19th century. The smaller size of the cans meant that you could fit thousands of pre-made meals in the ship's hold, allowing for longer and more direct voyages. More importantly, it means ships can make journeys of multiple legs without having to stop every few weeks to restock supplies. This kicked off a wave of exploration, like over northern Canada, around Antarctica, and most crucially, across the Pacific, the largest ocean on the planet. These long journeys inspired explorer and biopirate Henry Wickham to smuggle 70,000 rubber trees from Brazil under the guise of scientific specimens. Mountains of canned food allowed his crew to avoid stopping off anywhere, bypassing customs who might find the stolen seeds, and sailing directly to British-occupied Southeast Asia. He then sold the rubber seeds for a ridiculous markup price. The highly organised and ruthlessly efficient Asian rubber plantations vastly outperformed their South American counterparts, making everyone involved very rich. Within a year, Brazil's monopoly on rubber had snapped like an elastic band. Although it wasn't the empire's biggest money-making scheme, it produced a nice rainy day fund and reduced reliance on South America. Until, of course, the Japanese invaded Malaya and Burma in 1941, taking the industry for themselves. Now, the only source of rubber that the Allies had access to was in the colony of Ceylon, which is now modern Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka wasn't producing enough to meet demand for all the tyres, tank treads, raincoats and other important things that the war required. Allied scientists were directed to find an alternative way to make liquid rubber go further without it losing its stretchy elastic properties. For months, scientists melted down anything plasticky and added it to the liquid rubber to see what would happen.
What the hell?
But nothing worked. Until 1943, when a team at Harvard University added gasoline to the mixture. And this is the culmination of mistakes that started with the French Academy denying Philippe de Girard a reward for his invention of canned food. Because gasoline and rubber creates napalm.
What the hell, man? It's so interesting how he makes these links between these stories, but it's like, you can see it does make sense. The most influential woman of the 21st century. So this is the last story.
This is Teresa Lepore, the election supervisor for Palm Beach County in the state of Florida. Elected in 1996, she was responsible for designing the ballot for the upcoming 2000 presidential election. To save on pens, paper and ink, voters in this part of Florida slide their ballot into this cover and then punch a hole in the ballot to indicate their vote. This election there were a lot of candidates, so instead of putting the candidates all down the side, Lepore designed the ballot like this and made the text bigger. Palm Beach is full of elderly, short-sighted retirees. So let's meet the candidates. Up first is Republican George Bush, and to vote for him, you punch the first hole marked with an arrow and the number 3. Okay. Second is Democrat Al Gore. To vote for him, you punch the third hole marked with the number 5. Wait, why? Oh, right. So over here you have the third? Or is it 7th candidate? Pat Buchanan of the Reform Party, a radical centrist party that actually did quite well in previous elections, which is why they're listed at the top with the big dudes. And to vote for him, you punch the second hole marked with the number 4.
This seems a bit confusing. You'd be pressing the wrong ones. This is so weirdly organised.
Confused? The elderly half-blind retirees certainly were.
Yeah.
19,000 ballots were punched more than once by voters, over 6 times as many as in the previous election. Furthermore, votes for the Reform Party were unusually high in Palm Beach, more than 3 times the average for all the other counties in the state of Florida. An otherwise honest mistake, except by improbable coincidence, the ballots of Palm Beach County were the deciding factor in the election, because the
Wow.
Electoral College hinged entirely on Florida. 537 votes in Florida, and Lepore's terrible ballots were in the middle of it all. Is it really that difficult to believe at least 15% of those 3,400 votes were punched wrong accidentally? Even Buchanan himself said it was easy to get confused after seeing the ballot design. In fact, when Florida re-examined those ballots with multiple punches, they found that if they accepted ballots with 1 partially punched hole and 1 fully punched hole, Gore had actually won Florida by at least 60 votes. But you know by now that this definition was not accepted. Bush won and subsequently became the 41st President of the United States. I don't need to hammer home how bad President Bush was. He sits at the bottom of the pile for presidential approval ratings, along
Wow.
with such classics as Richard Nixon and controversy-free, wholesome family man. More important than what Bush did was what he didn't do. The 90s was the first decade in where climate change was starting to be taken seriously by governments in the developed world, and the United States was no exception. In 97, during the Clinton administration, the United States signed onto the Kyoto Protocol, a legally binding treaty among the world's biggest polluters to cut their carbon emissions below the 1990 levels. This was to be achieved through a variety of measures, such as increasing the use of renewable energy and improving energy efficiency. Al Gore was a vocal advocate for action on climate change. He had even written a book about it in 1992, which he outlined his vision for addressing the issue. But after Bush's election, the picture could not be more different. He questioned the very existence of man-made climate change. The planet is warming, sure, but human activity doesn't have anything to do with it, said the President's Council on Environmental Quality.
So is this why there's so much controversy behind it? Because comments like this were made? That's probably why it's seen as such a controversial thing. I still don't understand how it's such a political thing. I can see now why it is, because different parties have completely different opinions on it. But like, I just see it as a thing. I don't see how something like that can be a political thing. I just don't understand.
Which was staffed full of lobbyists from the oil and gas industry, an industry that had known that human activity does, in fact, have anything to do with it since at least the 1980s. The Bush administration quickly pulled out of the Kyoto Agreement, refusing to play an active role in any United Nations climate conferences for the next
that quick. Flipping hell, they weren't taking the time with this, were they?
8 years. And this certainly mattered. 25% of the world's carbon emissions at the time were caused by the United States. Any climate deal rested on whether the Americans would play ball. Had Gore been elected and followed through on his plan to tackle the issue, it's possible that the course of climate change could have been altered. Instead, the election set the stage for 2 decades of inaction on the issue. As global temperatures rise, water supplies will dwindle, leading to crop failures and water shortages in the most vulnerable places in the world. Those who don't die of dehydration or starvation might move northwards in search of cooler, more secure nations, creating a crisis the likes of which the world has never seen. Those who do stay will be forced to compete for increasingly limited resources in over-polluted hellholes. Lesser developed countries might even go to war with each other over access to water. Already, tensions between Egypt and Ethiopia are strained over a proposed dam which Egypt claim will cut off crucial supplies to the Nile, the source of water for nearly all Egyptians. Conflict aside, the mortality cost of the carbon we are putting into the air could be responsible for killing over 1 million people every year by the end of the century. 80 million in total. In the past 3 decades, 37% of all heat-related deaths were caused by a warming climate, up to half in Southeast Asia. Even if you don't believe that climate change is real, in my dad's lifetime, half of all wildlife on Earth has been wiped out by human activity. That's not a good thing. Teresa's mistake will echo not just for the rest of the century as we cope with the fallout from conflict in the Middle East, but also the next 1,000 years. The climate has irreversibly changed in a way that could have been slowed or prevented had the United States taken action sooner and not pulled out of Kyoto. In the subsequent months and years, Lepore received mountains of hate mail, accusing her of causing all of Bush's mistakes. She had to be escorted to and from work by the county sheriff after her car's tyres had been slashed. Al Gore's candidate for vice president, Joe Lieberman, was so pissed off that he personally went to Florida to campaign against Lepore when she was up for re-election, urging voters to vote for the Republican instead. But was Teresa entirely...
That is crazy. He switched up against his own team just to cover this. I mean, fair enough.
...for re-election, urging voters to vote for the Republican instead.
Wow.
But was Teresa entirely to blame? Probably not. All parties involved agreed to the ballot design. There were many faults in the Gore campaign that lost him key votes. The careless electorate of Palm Beach share some of the blame, And of course, it's impossible to say whether Al Gore would have been a good president or not. His party didn't control Congress at the time, limiting what he could have done. But unlike the other events discussed in this video, we can still fix the problem. Many of these projected events haven't even happened yet. Action can and is taking place to mitigate the damage. That 1 million people per year? That's only the most pessimistic scenario. By following the path we are currently on, we could potentially reduce that figure by 90%. If we go above and beyond what is promised, we could even achieve a net saving of lives. And while the little things you're told to do, like turning off the lights or recycling, won't make a difference in the grand scheme of things, and it's worth noting, is literally fossil fuel industry propaganda, that doesn't mean you can't do anything at all. This whole video has shown that anyone with a modicum of power or status can inadvertently alter the course of history. Whether you're a student, a scientist, a doctor, a chef, or a bureaucrat, the choices you make could have far-reaching consequences. By understanding the interconnected web that the present shares with history and the unwritten future, we can make more thoughtful and intentional decisions, and ultimately lead to a better world for ourselves and others. So no pressure then.
This is a good video, man. I enjoyed this. This 40 minutes passed quick as hell. The biggest historical blunder is when I slipped on a wet floor in front of my crush in 7th grade. A little fun fact about what he said at 27:24. The canned food was provided for the expedition was later found to contain high doses of lead, which caused lead poisoning. That was because the Royal Navy decided to buy their canned goods for the voyage from the lower bidder, hence the lead. God damn. Hence the lead. Oh, not lead. Quality stuff makes me think, despite the mild existential crisis, hope to see more. It's simply fascinating how so many problems can be blamed on one thing. I mean, yeah, some people may say some of these are a reach or not, but they're all linked. That's the end of it, you know, they're all linked in some way. But this is a really interesting watch. I enjoyed this a lot, and like I said, if you want to check this guy's channel out, links will be in the description to the video, and you can find him from there. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Until next time, like, subscribe, peace.